Good evening. How are you, everybody? It's great to be with you. That song also from Zusha, from their album Open the Gates, is called Moshcheni Acharecha. Beautiful thought from Song of Songs. Pull me to you and I will run after you, we say to God. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Monday, doing a double daf tonight. We're not going to cover all the material on the 2 pages, but when I skip a section, I'll let you know what I'm skipping and more or less why. Sorry, we had a couple of Zoom meetings today. Let me get that set up so we can light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Monday night? Tom in PA, Sharon in New Jersey, Pauline in Chicago, Land, Shandor in the Bronx, Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida, David in South Bend, Yosef in Massachusetts, Paul in the Great Northwest, Ruth in Kentucky, Paula in Chicago, James in Annapolis, Bill in mid-Missouri. Tonight's title, Understatement of the Millennium, talking about complicated families. Karen in Northern California, Jan in Massachusetts, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Rebecca in LA, Lucy in Minnesota, Lindsay in Cincinnati, and Samantha in Tacoma, Washington. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with us. All right, let's get into it. This idea that we're generally doing the whole daf, but sometimes we're going to have to skip some material so that we can stay on schedule. Tonight, doing a double daf will put us back on schedule. Then, this week is more or less a normal week. Otherwise, next week is the days leading up to Pesach, to Passover. So this week, Passover lands on a Friday night. So outside of Israel, we'll have 2 Seders, Friday night and Saturday night. And those are full-fledged festival days, Saturday and Sunday. So we certainly can't broadcast. We might be able to broadcast Sunday night, sort of coming out of the first days of Chag, the same way we come out of Shabbos on Saturday nights. So probably I'll be able to do a show on Sunday night. As we get closer, I'll confirm whether that's on or not. So you might think, well, we could do our regular Friday show. I'm not talking about this week. I'm talking about next week. I'm just thinking ahead. That we could do our regular Friday show on Friday at noon, but with a Seder that night and Shalom Bayis, peace in the home, very important value, perhaps the most important value in the Jewish home. Yeah, so Nina is going to be, she does such an amazing job preparing for a Seder. We have family and friends are going to be with us. We're thrilled. Our daughter's coming home from Israel. My father's coming in from the East Coast. Friends are coming from out of state. So it's going to be a big deal to put on that Seder Friday evening. And I know that there's going to be a lot to do that Friday afternoon. Nina's going to be out of pocket for sure, and I really have to be there to help. So I think we're really going to look at it like a 3-day Chag, even though technically we could do a show Friday at noon. As we saw in Tractate Pesachim, from that day, Erev Pesach, from noon on, in the ancient times, you were slaughtering the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach. You weren't doing any work. Work was not even permitted that afternoon. So I think we'll do our last show, not this week, but next week, that Thursday night. And then we'll be off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Maybe we'll be able to do a show Sunday night. Not sure yet. So the upshot of all of this is we're going to have to miss a few days of class. And then to get back on schedule, we'll have one of those multi-day highlights of the dafs that we missed when we get back, probably on that Monday. And that's the way that we'll cover it. You, if you're doing Daf Yomi and you want to complete your journey through the Talmud, you should read on your own. And then I'll do a highlights show when I get back of the material that we missed. So just a little bit of a preview, not of this week, but next week. Okay, so today We're doing pages 27 and 28 here in Tractate Yevamos. We are now in chapter 3, and we'll be completing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 3. We're picking it up at the bottom of 26b. And this chapter 3 opens with a Mishnah where we're not discussing new laws that haven't been laid out before, but rather applying the laws of yibum and chalitzah that we learned in chapters 1 and 2 to, more intricate situations, shall we say, here in chapter 3. Okay, so yesterday, our Mishnah, we started discussing this Mishnah number 1, the case of 4 brothers, 2 of whom were married to 2 sisters, and the ones who were married to the sisters died, and so now you can have 2 brothers married to 2 sisters. But now that the brothers died, these 2 sisters come up for yibum before the surviving brothers. And so now the issue is they immediately have a levirate bond with the surviving brothers, but they are sisters. Even if there was one surviving brother, it'd be very problematic because now the surviving brothers each have a bond with 2 sisters, right? You can't be married to a woman and her sister. And so this is going to cause all kinds of complication. So the Gemara asks, how can this statement be cited in the name of Rav, but didn't this idea where we left off yesterday, right? That what's going to happen with these 2 brothers if they both perform chalitzah with both sisters? Even that is problematic. Because if you're performing chalitzah with a woman and her sister, at least one of those chalitzahs is an invalid chalitzah because you have a levirate bond with both a woman and her sister. So already they should be exempting one another, and there shouldn't be yibum or chalitzah at all. But because it's a complex situation, the sages sometimes required you to do sort of like, cover your butt chalitzah just to make sure it gets done and the women are free. Okay, so the Gemara asks, how can this statement that was at the end of yesterday's class be cited in the name of Rav? But didn't Rav say the levirate bond, right? So the levirate bond means before you perform either yibum or chalitzah, you're in this in-between state where the Yavam, the surviving brother, has a bond, an obligation to perform yibum or chalitzah. Until he does that, he is bound to the Yevama, the widow. And then the question is that bond itself substantial such that you consider it like you're pseudo-married to that woman because of this bond? And if she has a sister, then that sister's fully exempt. Because, right, if you're married to a woman, you can't be married to her sister, right? So in a simple case where there were 2 brothers married to 2 sisters, one of the brothers dies, right? So then that wife the widow would come before the brother for yibum or chalitzah, but since he's married to her sister, they're done. Right? There's no yibum or chalitzah because he's already married to her sister. He can't marry this widow who's now the sister of his wife. She doesn't require chalitzah or yibum. But because there were 2 brothers married to 2 sisters and they both died and there are surviving brothers, now we're in this complicated situation. So didn't Rav say that the levirate bond is not substantial, meaning there might be an obligation there, but the fact that you have this obligation is not going to exempt the woman's sister, who also comes before you for yibum, because the levirate bond is not substantial. It's not enough to exempt the sister or the co-wife, etc. Now, this law was explained based on the assumption that the levirate bond is substantial. So the Gemara explains. The Gemara answers, indeed, according to Rav himself, it is unnecessary to perform chalitzah with multiple brothers. He, however, states this law in accordance with the statement of the one who says that the levirate bond is substantial, despite the fact that he does not hold this way himself. right? And we see, because these laws are very complicated, the sages often had to make a distinction between their ruling and somebody else's ruling as they worked through the implications of the incident or of the hypothetical situation. And with regard to the above case, Shmuel said a different halachic ruling. It is sufficient if one brother performs chalitzah with each of the sisters. Now, just so that we get this situation a little bit clearer, I'm going to just cite the law where it came out, which is kind of a very quick summation of what we're talking about. So if he performed with chalitzah with the sisters, the rival wives are not exempt, right? So there were sisters and there were co-wives, which the Gemara translates as rival wives. I've been saying co-wives more often, but the word for a co-wife is a tsara, right? A co-wife is a tsar. If a man had two wives, they are tsaros of each other. Why that's interesting is because that's the same word, same root as tsuris, right? Tsuris is aggravation, right? So the idea is that if two wives are married to the same man, there's going to be tsuris, and that's why they're called tsaros. Co-wives is like the same root as wives who cause tsuris, right? Because they're to each other and perhaps to the husband as well. At any rate, in the case of three brothers, two of whom were married to two sisters, where each of the brothers who were married to one of the sisters also had a rival wife. Each wife had a rival wife, right? So each brother, there were two brothers married to two sisters, and each of those brothers had two wives. The two wives were not related to the sisters, other than the fact that they were co-wives with them. And then the brothers died, and the four wives came before the third brother for yibum, right? So now they come before the third brother, two sisters, and each with a co-wife or a rival wife. So if the Yavam, the surviving brother, performs the act of chalitzah with the co-wives, right, with the rival wives, then the sisters become exempt as well. However, if he performs chalitzah with the sisters, the co-wives do not become exempt, in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, as explained by Rav Ashi. That is the situation that we're dealing with, and we're arriving at the proof of this, that if he performs chalitzah with the rival wives, yes, everybody is done, right? The rival wives had chalitzah, they're free to go, and because their co-wives happen to be this pair of sisters, you only need to perform, when a Yavam comes before two Yevamos who are co-wives, if he performs chalitzah with one of them, the other one is free to go. So if you do that with the co-wives here, the pair of sisters are also free to go. But if he performs chalitzah with the sisters, it's a problem because these sisters are related to each other as sisters. The chalitzah is somewhat defective, and therefore the co-wives are not freed until they also perform chalitzah with the Yavam. And here we're explaining why that is so. So with regard to this case, Shmuel said a different halachic ruling. It is sufficient if one brother performs chalitzah with each of the sisters. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but since we have heard that Shmuel said we require a full-fledged chalitzah, and invalid chalitzah does not result in complete exemption, so then this ruling is difficult, and it is not clear why the invalid chalitzah in this case would be sufficient. As Shmuel said, in the case of three brothers, two of whom were married to several women, including sisters, and the two married brothers later died, and their wives happened before the Yavam for yibum. If the Yavam, the surviving brother, performed chalitzah with the sisters who were among the wives, the co-wives are not thereby exempt. And one can deduce from here that since the Yavam cannot consummate the levirate marriage with the sisters, as each is the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond, then the act of chalitzah is also invalid. And invalid chalitzah is ineffective in exempting the rival wives. It is concluded from here that Shmuel requires valid chalitzah, i.e. chalitzah that occurs when there is a possibility of consummating the levirate marriage, the yibum. According to this rationale, however, Shmuel's ruling in the above case is difficult. With regard to the second sister, when there exists the possibility for Shimon's chalitzah, i.e. the chalitzah of the second brother who did not yet perform chalitzah, and this could be a valid chalitzah, would it be allowed for Reuven, the brother who already did chalitzah with one sister, to perform invalid chalitzah with her? So the Gemara resolves this difficulty by reinterpreting Shmuel's statement. What does it mean that it says one brother performs chalitzah with each of them, that Shmuel stated? Shmuel says that with regard to the middle one, i.e. the third sister, one of the two brothers performs chalitzah with her. And the Gemara asks, but didn't he say each of them? Indicating that one brother performs chalitzah with all of the sisters. And the Gemara answers, since the brother who performed chalitzah with one sister repeats the act with another sister, it turns out that most of the acts of chalitzah are performed with him, this one brother, and this is why it is called with each of them. And if you wish, say a different answer. When Shmuel said we require a full-fledged chalitzah, this applies only to exempt her rival wife by means of that chalitzah. But to exempt the woman herself, even invalid chalitzah would render her exempt. In the case above, since no rival wives are involved, it would be sufficient for one brother to perform chalitzah with each of the sisters. Now, apropos of Shmuel's statement, the Gemara examines the matter itself. So this proof that was brought in from a different case in order to understand whether Shmuel rules that, invalid chalitzah is effective or not in the case of a co-wife. Here we examine that case. So the Gemara examines the matter itself. Shmuel said, in the case of three brothers, two of whom were married to several women, including two sisters, and the two married brothers later died, and their wives came before the Yavam for levirate marriage, right? So 4 women come before the surviving brother, 2 of them are sisters, 2 of them are not. If the Yavam perform chalitzah with the sisters, the co-wives are not thereby exempt. But if he perform chalitzah with the rival wives, then the sisters are exempt. And similarly, if he gave a bill of divorce to one of these women, whereby he would no longer be permitted to consummate the yibum, the levirate marriage, with them due to a rabbinic decree, and he then performed chalitzah with the woman who received the bill of divorce, the rival wife is not thereby exempt. Since he was unable to consummate the levirate marriage with her, the chalitzah that he performed with her was invalid. And invalid chalitzah does not exempt the rival wife. It might exempt the wife, but not one of the sisters, but not her co-wife. If he performed the act of chalitzah with the co-wife, with the rival wife, then the woman who received a bill of divorce is exempt. And the ruling is similar with regard to the case where the Yavam performed maimar, which is levirate betrothal, which we've talked about, where you have a levirate bond. There's a woman before the Yavam for yibum or chalitzah, and he says, okay, I'm going to perform yibum with you, just not at this moment, but I hereby betroth you that we will perform yibum later. This in-between step, totally unnecessary. He doesn't need to do that. When a Yavama comes before a Yavam for yibum, they could just have marital relations and then they're married. But if he says, I'm going to do it, that's called levirate betrothal, and the word for that is maimar. So whether Yavam perform maimar, i.e. levirate betrothal to one of the wives, if he then perform chalitzah with the woman who received his levirate betrothal, he changed his mind. He said he was going to perform yibum with her, but then he performs chalitzah instead. In that situation, the rival wife does not become exempt. Indeed, this chalitzah is invalid as well. For once the Yavam performed levirate betrothal, he can't turn around and just perform chalitzah and say bye-bye. Because he betrothed his Yavama, now they're one step closer, much closer to being married. Yibum would create a marriage. But since he performed levirate betrothal, if he then changes his mind and he says, we're not going to do yibum, we're going to just go our separate ways, chalitzah is insufficient. He now needs to give her a get, a bill of divorce, because the betrothal creates marriage. So even though they didn't consummate that betrothal into full-fledged marriage, The betrothal itself requires a bill of divorce, a get, in order for them to go their separate ways. If he did chalitzah instead of the get, it's insufficient. It's an invalid chalitzah. And that's why the woman's co-wife or rival wife would not thereby become exempt. If he had performed chalitzah with her in the first place, her co-wife would become exempt. But because he went this weird road of levirate betrothal and then chalitzah, he did everything wrong. And so he has not exempted the rival wife from her obligation to him, her levirate bond with him. Because the woman needs to receive a full bill of divorce in addition to the chalitzah in order to exempt her from her bond, the chalitzah is considered invalid and is not sufficient to exempt the rival wife. But if the yavam perform chalitzah with the rival wife, that's a full-fledged valid chalitzah, then her rival wife, who is one of these sisters, becomes exempt and they're all set. Now the Gemara asks, what is different in the two cases? Why, if he performed chalitzah with the sisters, and why is it that if he performed chalitzah with the sisters, the rival wives are not exempt? Well, this is because the sister is related to him as the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond, right? Because two brothers died who were married to two sisters, and now those two sisters come before the surviving brother at the same time. He has, whichever way you look at it, a levirate bond with both of them. So if you look at one at a time, he has a levirate bond with this one, and therefore her sister is exempt because he can't marry her because he has a levirate bond with her sister. But the other sister also has a levirate bond with him, and he can't marry her sister because of this levirate bond, right? So they mutually exempt each other, but it's not this full exemption. That's why we have this complicated situation. So this is because the sister is related to him as the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. Since, under these circumstances, he would not be permitted to consummate, he could definitely not perform yibum in no case with her, so then her chalitzah also is considered an invalid chalitzah because he can't perform yibum with a woman where he has a levirate bond with her sister. So the chalitzah is also problematic as well. However, if that is so, when he performed chalitzah with the rival wives, the sisters should not be exempt either, as the rival wives are related to him as rival wives of the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. If the woman is forbidden to him due to a relationship created by the levirate bond, then her rival wife is forbidden to him in the same way, and her chalitzah would be invalid as well, right? The Gemara answers, Shmuel holds that the levirate bond is not substantial, and therefore the levirate bond does not create a relationship between the yavam and the sisters such that the prohibition would be extended to the rival wives as well. And now you see why Shmuel holds that the levirate bond is not substantial. It makes matters much simpler. Now the Gemara challenges, but didn't Shmuel say explicitly that the levirate bond is substantial? The Gemara responds, he stated this halacha in accordance with the statement of those who say that the levirate bond is not substantial. He might hold the opposite, but in this law, he's explaining it according to those who say that the levirate bond is not substantial. The Gemara asks, okay, if that is indeed so, that he stated this ruling in accordance with the opinion that the levirate bond is not substantial, even though he himself doesn't rule that way, then, when the Yavam performed chalitzah with the sisters, why were their rival wives not exempt? Granted, Rachel's rival, just giving names as examples, granted that Rachel's rival wife, i.e. the rival wife of the second sister, would not be exempt, for once he performed chalitzah with Leah, the first sister, and then later performed chalitzah with Rachel, it turns out that Rachel's chalitzah was invalid chalitzah, as he could not consummate the levirate marriage with Rachel because she is the sister of a woman with whom he performed chalitzah. She's already exempt for that reason. And invalid chalitzah does not exempt the rival wife. However, the rival wife of Leah should be exempt because if the levirate bond is not substantial, then the chalitzah he performed with the first sister was a valid chalitzah, and her rival wife should be exempt immediately at that point. And the Gemara explains, What does it mean that it says the rival wives are not exempt, that Shmuel stated? It is referring only to the rival wife of the second sister, Rachel. She is not exempt. The Gemara challenges, but he said rival wives, plural, seeming to refer to both rival wives. And the Gemara answers, he spoke of rival wives in general. In other words, this is a general law. And for that reason, it was stated in the plural. However, it does not mean that both the rival wife of the first sister and the rival wife of the second sister are not exempt. Well, the Gemara challenges this. If that is so, that when Shmuel chose to speak in the plural, he was referring only to the rival wife of Rachel, the second sister, there arises a difficulty with the second half of the statement. If he performed chalitzah with the rival wives, the sisters are exempt. But would Rachel become exempt by chalitzah performed with her rival wife? But didn't we learn in the Mishna, a man is forbidden to marry the rival wife of a close relative of his chalitzah, somebody with whom he performed chalitzah. Once the Yevamos performs chalitzah with one sister, Leah, then her sister's rival wife, i.e. Rachel's rival wife, would be considered the rival wife of the sister of a woman with whom he performed chalitzah. Being as she is forbidden to him, her chalitzah is invalid. She's exempt. Why is he performing chalitzah with her? If he performs chalitzah with a woman who is prohibited to him, he couldn't perform yibum or chalitzah with her, so the chalitzah is meaningless. Therefore, why would her rival wife become exempt by virtue of that chalitzah? And the Gemara answers, Shmuel also meant to distinguish between a case where he began and the case where he did not begin. This is how this statement should be understood. If he began by performing chalitzah with one of the sisters, he may not finish by performing a second act of chalitzah with any of the rival wives. As we learned in the Mishna on page 40, a man is forbidden to marry the rival wife of a close relative of his chalitzah. And due to this prohibition, chalitzah performed with the second rival wife is invalid chalitzah and would not exempt the second sister. If, however, he began with the rival wives and performed the first chalitzah with the rival wife of Leah, so then he may finish with the sisters as well and perform the second chalitzah with Leah. As we learned in that Mishna on page 40, a man is permitted to marry the close relative of the rival wife of his chalitzah. Therefore, if he performed chalitzah with Leah's rival wife, then Rachel, who is the sister of the rival wife of his chalitzah, is permitted to him, and he can therefore perform a completely valid chalitzah with her and thereby exempt her rival wife. Rav Ashi said, actually, excuse me. Rav Ashi said, actually, Shmuel's statement should be interpreted as you originally said, that Shmuel's rationale for these laws accords with his opinion that the levirate bond is substantial. As for the objection that was raised as to why the sisters would be exempted by chalitzah performed with the rival wives, if these rival wives were considered the rival wife of the sister of a woman with whom the Yevamos has a levirate bond, this can be resolved as follows. This is because the levirate bond is not so strong as to render the status of a rival wife like an actual forbidden relative. The levirate bond is sufficient to prohibit levirate marriage with the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond, but not sufficient to prohibit the rival wives to the Yevamos. This is exactly what's going on here, right? Is that they need a principle that's going to work in every situation. But because you have brothers and sisters and rival wives, in increasing levels of complexity, then the principle breaks down and produces unintended consequences, as it were. And so they have to keep refining the nuance of the principle so that it can continue to work. And that's why they're getting now to where the levirate bond is substantial, but it's not so substantial that it's going to create an untenable situation. They're not being wishy-washy. They're testing the principle to see how far it will go and how much refinement it needs. So the Gemara comments, it is taught in a baraisa, in accordance with the opinion of Rav Ashi, if he perform chalitzah with the sisters, the rival wives are not exempt from levirate marriage, And from here, one can deduce, consequently, if he performed chalitzah with the rival wives, the sisters are exempt. And what is the reason for this? Is it not because this Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, held that the levirate bond is substantial, and therefore the rival wives were not rendered exempt by the chalitzah of the sisters, but nevertheless, the levirate bond is not so strong as to render the rival wife equivalent to a forbidden relative. Therefore, the prohibition with regard to rival wives in this case is less severe than the prohibition concerning the sisters themselves, and when they perform chalitzah, the chalitzah is valid and the sisters are exempt. Bottom line, in this case, where two sisters and two other women, their co-wives, come before a surviving brother all at the same time, if he performs chalitzah with the rival wives, everybody's exempt. If he performs chalitzah with the sisters, it's a problematic chalitzah that is not going to render the rival wives exempt, and he will need to perform chalitzah with the rival wives as well. Rabbi Abba Bar Memel rejected this explanation, and he said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Baraisa taught? It is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai. As we learned in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai permitted the rival wives to marry the brothers. Even if they are the rival wives of his actual relatives, they are permitted to enter into yibum. In the case above, when they are merely rival wives of the sister with whom he has a levirate bond, all the more so they are permitted to enter into levirate marriage. And the Gemara objects, if that is so, if this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, who say that rival wives are permitted, well then the rival wife should enter into yibum, not just chalitzah. They could even enter into yibum. It doesn't matter if you're saying, according to Beis Shammai, that even though a yavama is prohibited to marry the yavam, so she's exempt, but the rival wife is not exempted by that situation, and now the yavam can either perform chalitzah with the rival wife or even yibum with her. That's only according to Beis Shammai. The law is according to Beis Hillel, that if a woman is prohibited to the yavam, her co-wife is prohibited as well. But if we're actually saying this law is according to Beis Shammai, so then just take the two women separately. The sisters might be prohibited for whatever reason, but the co-wives, the rival wives, there could go chalitzah with them or even yibum. According to Beis Hillel, yibum is off the table, but according to Beis Shammai, yibum is on the table. The Gemara answers, the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, who said, come and let us establish a ruling that the rival wives must perform chalitzah. They may not enter into yibum, thereby circumventing the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Although Beis Shammai permitted the rival wives to perform yibum, they should perform chalitzah instead in order to conform to Beis Hillel's opinion as well, so that everybody would agree on the outcome. The Gemara objects, but didn't the masters say that they did not succeed in finalizing the matter and establishing Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's amendment before the times of trouble came in the form of anti-Jewish decrees, and so this ruling was never actually established? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, after this time, after the times of the troubles, other sages returned to this issue and established this amendment in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's opinion, meaning, eventually the law was established according to Beis Hillel anyway, but even before that, they all agreed that the law should follow Beis Hillel since it was more stringent in this regard, and by everyone agreeing to just follow Beis Hillel's ruling, everyone is satisfied. Apropos the statement of Shmuel with regard to a woman who received a bill of divorce and a woman who received levirate betrothal, a dilemma was raised before the sages. Now we're on 27b. If two women happen before a single yavam for levirate marriage, and one is a woman who received a bill of divorce and the other is a woman who received levirate betrothal, which of them has precedence for chalitzah? One received a bill of divorce, the other received levirate betrothal. In both cases, in other words, they made mistakes, right? If a yavama comes before a yavam, it's either yibum or chalitzah. Levirate betrothal, problematic, okay, but we know how to deal with it. Bill of divorce, what are you doing? Why are you giving this woman a bill of divorce? What she needs is chalitzah or yibum. When do you give a bill of divorce in a yibum situation? Because you first introduced this levered betrothal idea, and then you changed your mind. Instead of performing yibum with her, you decided to end it. So now she needs the bill of divorce and then chalitzah. Okay? But in any rate, so one woman received the bill of divorce, the other received levered betrothal, which has precedence for chalitzah, because you only need to perform chalitzah with one of the co-wives, and then the other one is exempt. Is the woman who received the bill of divorce preferred because he began the process of chalitzah with her, as presenting a bill of divorce represents the first step separating the woman from him? Or perhaps the woman who received levered betrothal is preferred because she is closest to being able to enter into permitted sexual intercourse. They could certainly go forward to yibum. They didn't need the betrothal, but now that they have it, it's not going to stop them from performing yibum and then being fully married. The act of levered betrothal is generally done, if it's done, just prior to levirate marriage, and is equivalent to the act of betrothal in non-levirate contexts, non-yibum contexts. As a result, levirate betrothal strengthens the connection between the woman, and the yavam. And for this reason, it may be preferable to perform chalitzah with the woman who received levirate betrothal. And Rav Ashi said, coming here, the sages disputed the ruling with regard to a yavam who performed levirate betrothal with one sister-in-law and then performed it with her rival wife as well, or conversely gave both women a bill of divorce. In such cases, would the second levirate betrothal or bill of divorce be effective? It was taught, and Rabban Gamliel concedes that a bill of divorce is effective after levirate betrothal. It's necessary if you want to part company. Therefore, the bill of divorce that the Yavam gave to one Yavama after performing levirate betrothal with the other Yavama is effective to some degree. Similarly, Rabban Gamliel concedes that levirate betrothal performed after a bill of divorce is effective. If the bill of divorce is preferred to levirate betrothal, then levirate betrothal performed afterwards should not be effective. And the opposite would hold true as well. And if levirate betrothal is preferred, then a bill of divorce given afterwards should not be effective. Rather, must one not conclude from this statement that the two are equivalent to each other? The Gemara summarizes, indeed, conclude from this statement that they are equivalent. Therefore, neither the woman who received a bill of divorce nor the woman who received levirate betrothal has precedence for chalitzah. In both cases, you did something unnecessary, so, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, which one you're going to perform the chalitzah with. Okay, now we're going to start skipping some material. The next case is Rav Huna said that Rav said, in a case of two sisters who became Yevamos, the two sisters were married to two brothers who died, who happened before one Yavam for levirate marriage. If he performed chalitzah with the first sister, then she is permitted to marry any man. If he performed chalitzah with the second sister, then she is permitted to do so as well. But if the first sister died before the Yavam was able to perform chalitzah with her, then he is permitted to take the second sister. And then they're going to go into all the permutations of this case. Very interesting case, but we just don't have time to do everything tonight. So we're going to skip that case and all the ensuing discussion that comes out of it. So now we move forward through page 28a. About halfway down the page of 28a, and we pick up a new case with regard to the case of two brothers who married their wives before consulting the court. Right? So this is probably a case where there were four brothers. So there were two brothers married to two sisters. Maybe they were co-wives. The two brothers died. The two sisters now come before the surviving two brothers. They're supposed to perform chalitzah and go their separate ways. But instead, they married these two sisters. You don't have one brother married to two sisters. There were first two brothers married to two sisters, and then those two sisters fell to the two surviving brothers, and they married them. They weren't supposed to, but they did. All right? And they did so before consulting the court, who would have told them it's prohibited. So the Mishna states that the women should be divorced. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says that this is not a matter of dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. As Beis Shammai say, they maintain them as their wives, and Beis Hillel say they should divorce them. An expanded version of this discussion is taught in the Tosefta, and then they argue about who said what. Not what the ruling should be, but who is the source of the ruling. We're going to skip that discussion. That's a relatively quick one. And now we're near the bottom of 28a. And now we're referring back to our Mishnah, which is the first Mishnah of chapter 3. So the Mishnah stated, if one of the sisters was forbidden to one of the brothers due to a prohibition against forbidden relations, well, then he is prohibited from marrying her, but he could marry her sister. Right? So if two sisters come before a Yavam, we have this whole problem of the levered bond with one, and then therefore he has to perform chalitzah with the other. However, if one of those sisters, because they're paternal brothers, let's say, so one of the sisters is related to him, even though she wasn't related to his brother, but she is related to him, so there is no yibum or chalitzah with this brother, so therefore he could marry her sister, right? Because there were two brothers married to two sisters. Now they come before this surviving brother. One of those sisters is prohibited to the surviving brother because of some other relation on his mother's side. So then her sister would be permitted to him because there is no other bond with her sister. So this other sister that he's not related to him, he could actually perform yibum with her. Okay, that makes sense. And the Gemara asks, we already learned this on one occasion when her sister, who is a forbidden relative to the Yavam, is her Yevama as well. She performs chalitzah or enters into yibum. So the Gemara answers, it is necessary that this be said here as well, for it taught us the law only there in more general formulation, back on page 20. So then I might have said the Yavam is permitted to marry the sister because there's no reason to issue a rabbinic decree due to a second brother. There is only one Yavam to whom one sister is permitted and the other is forbidden, so he can marry the one that's permitted. But here where we have two brothers, right, two sisters that were married to two brothers, both of those brothers died, and now those two sisters come before two surviving brothers, where there is a reason to issue a rabbinic decree due to the second brother, lest he consummate the levirate marriage as well, I would say that we do not allow even the first brother to perform yibum, and both sisters-in-law should be forbidden to both brothers. That's not the case, and that's why it's stated here in chapter 3. And if the Mishnah had taught us the law only here, it would have been possible to say that the permissibility of levirate marriage here is because there is a second brother who indicates by refraining from performing yibum that the sister of a woman bound by a levirate bond is forbidden. However, where there is not a second brother, I would say no, this law would not apply due to a concern that people might wrongly conclude that the sister of a woman bound by a levirate bond is permitted. Therefore, it is necessary to state this law in both places because we learned two different items from each of them. So it was taught in the Mishnah, if one of the sisters was forbidden to one of the brothers due to a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah or due to a prohibition stemming from sanctity, like one of the brothers is the Kohen Gadol and he can't marry a widow, so she's prohibited to him, then her sister must perform chalitzah and may not enter into yibum. And the Gemara wonders, we already learned this as well. Now we're in 28b. If a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah or prohibition stemming from sanctity will be transgressed through the levirate marriage, then the woman must perform chalitzah and may not enter into yibum. The Gemara answers, there is a novelty here in chapter 3, even though we learned this law already. There, where the law is reviewed in general terms, it speaks of a prohibition due to a mitzvah alone. One woman happened before the Yavam for levirate marriage, and it is only as a result of this prohibition that she is prevented from entering into levirate marriage. Here, there is a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, and in addition, her sister happened before the Yevamim, the surviving brothers, for levirate marriage together with her. That's a more complicated situation and requires review. It might enter your mind to say, let the prohibition resulting from a mitzvah stand in the same place, i.e., the same level of severity as the prohibition against forbidden relatives. Consequently, the woman who is forbidden to the Yavam is considered a forbidden relative and her sister is permitted to him, despite the fact that the prohibition resulting from a mitzvah is not as severe as a prohibited relative. Here it is given equal status. And we might say, so let her sister enter into levirate marriage. Therefore, this comes to teach us that it is not the case, right? So if the two sisters that come before the surviving brothers one of them is prohibited to this brother. Therefore, he doesn't have two sisters before him, and he can marry the other sister. But if one of those women is prohibited to him because he's the Kohen Gadol, well, that would apply to both of them. So there's a different matter here. Prohibition due to a mitzvah, which I'm just not getting the example in my head right now. But the point is that prohibition due to a mitzvah does not have the same severity as prohibited due to a forbidden relation. Therefore, she is kind of bound to him, and he doesn't have the option to marry her sister. Now, the Gemara asks, and why, in fact, does her sister not enter into levirate marriage? Why is it that way? Why not consider prohibited due to a mitzvah to have the same impact as prohibited due to a forbidden relation? And the Gemara answers, her sister is forbidden to him because by Torah law, the prohibited woman is still set before the Yavam for levirate marriage. Were he to take the sister in levirate marriage, he would essentially be encountering the sister of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. It might enter your mind to say that due to the mitzvah of levirate marriage, the sages did as they did and nullified their decree prohibiting the sister of a woman with whom the Yavam has a levirate bond from entering levirate marriage, when the original sister is forbidden only as the result of a mitzvah as opposed to a prohibited relation. Therefore, it teaches us that they did not cancel their decree in this situation. It was taught in the Mishna. If one of those women was forbidden to this one brother due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, and the second was forbidden to the second brother due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, okay, then she who was forbidden to this brother is permitted to the other brother, and she who was forbidden to this brother is permitted to that brother, and they can each perform yibum. And the Gemara asks, why do I need this law as well? For this is identical to that which was taught earlier when the Mishna stated that if one of the sisters were forbidden to one of the brothers due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, then he's forbidden to marry her but permitted to marry her sister. It's just doubling that case in both directions with the two brothers. However, the second brother, who is not a close relative of either sister, he's prohibited from marrying both. He cannot marry either one of them. Once the Mishnah taught that the Yavam is permitted to marry the woman who is not related, to whom he is not related, what is the difference to me if there is one brother or two brothers? If this happened to both brothers, clearly both should be allowed. The Gemara answers, it is necessary to state this, for if it taught us the law only there, in the case where only one brother is permitted to marry one of these sisters, one might have said this is because there is a second brother who indicates that the sister of a woman bound by a levirate bond is forbidden to him by refraining from levirate marriage with her. However, here, where there is not a second brother who indicates this, as both brothers are willing to perform levirate marriage, then I would say no, the law would not apply due to the concern that people might wrongly conclude that the sister of a woman with whom the Yavam has a levirate bond is permitted even in cases where the other woman is not a forbidden relative. And the opposite could also be said. If it taught us the ruling only here in the case of two brothers, one might have said, on the contrary, they both indicate the nature of each other's status. Each of the brothers married a specific sister-in-law, i.e. the woman who was not his close relative, indicating he does not have a levirate bond with the other sister. But in the other case, where one brother is allowed to consummate yibum and the second brother is prohibited to both sisters, I might say that no, we would not allow the marriage of the first brother either, and therefore it is necessary to state the law in both cases. And it was taught in a Mishnah, and this is the case that was referred to when they said when her sister is also her Yevama. She either performs chalitzah or enters into yibum. And the Gemara asks, what does the expression "this is" come to exclude? And the Gemara answers, it excludes the case where there is a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah for this one and a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah for that one. We don't treat it the same as prohibition stemming from forbidden relationships. Although each woman is forbidden to a different brother due to a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, they may not enter into yibum with the one that is permitted to them, and chalitzah is required in both cases. And the Gemara asks, why do I need this as well? This is identical to that which was taught previously, that if one of the sisters was forbidden to the Yavam due to the prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, then he is not permitted to consummate the levirate marriage with either of them. What difference is there to me if she happened before one brother or two? And then the Gemara explains how there is a nuance that we get from this case where there's two brothers and two sisters that we wouldn't have where there was only one brother when we studied this law previously. That's where we're going to end. What we're skipping now is a discussion of a case that can only be understood if there were not just two brothers married to two sisters and then they died and there were two surviving brothers, but rather there were two brothers married to two sisters and then those two brothers died and the sisters came before the next set of two brothers and they dealt with what they dealt with, and there were co-wives as well, so there were four wives. And then the second set of brothers also dies. And then everybody, all these four women come up for yibum for a second time before a new set of brothers, a case of six brothers. And then to properly understand the ruling, they actually have to add a fourth pair of brothers. Six brothers wasn't enough to explain the ruling. 8 brothers are necessary. And if you want to trace that through and keep all the logic straight, Yasher Koach, may you be strengthened and really get it right. I'm skipping it for the purposes of today's class. So we're going to knock off there. And tomorrow we'll pick it up near the bottom of 28b by starting Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Okay, let us go to questions or comments here on pages 27 and 28. Tom, I suppose you can't have a levirate bond with someone you are not permitted to marry. Like, in theory, you should be exactly right? Because if the marriage is prohibited on account of she has a different relationship with the Yavam, she's his daughter, she's his maternal sister, something like that. So there's a different relationship in play, then she's not permitted to marry him. There's no yibum, there's no chalitzah, there is no levirate bond. But if the reason that their marriage is prohibited is not as explicit as an incestuous, as it would create a prohibited incestuous relationship, but rather it's, they're prohibited to marry each other because of a mitzvah or because of sanctity or a couple other, situations, that's where we have this pseudo levirate bond. He can't marry her, but it's not, but there is some kind of a bond that has to be dealt with, and that's why chalitzah is required. There is a bond, but it's not strong enough to permit yibum, and that's where chalitzah is required, as opposed to when they would have some kind of incestuous relationship. If they married, there is no levirate bond, and neither yibum nor chalitzah are required or even permitted. Salsa Canada. If the wife dies and husband ends up being a childless widow, I guess a widower, right? A male widow. Is there yibum for him? No. Right? No. If the wife dies and the husband ends up being a childless widower, is there yibum for him? No. And the reason is because inheritance under Torah law is patriarchal, right? So the problem is that if a man dies without having a child, then there is no heir. And under the tribal system, right, where you're a Levite if your dad was a Levite, you're a Cohen if your dad was a Cohen, and when the other tribes were known, right, you would be a Reubenite or a Judahite or a Benjaminite, etc., according to your father. And that's why his house needed building up, as it were, because he never had a child. If a woman, dies without having a child, it's tragic, but it didn't affect the laws of inheritance, particularly land inheritance. So this man who didn't have a child by the woman before she died, or even if he did, right? You're asking about the reverse situation. If a man marries a woman who has a child from an earlier marriage, but he himself doesn't have a child, that's why when he dies, there still is a yibum situation, even though his wife is not childless. but it's not. It doesn't apply in reverse. If the woman dies childless, this man is free to marry another woman and produce an heir, and it's not a yibum situation at all. And in fact, because it's not a yibum situation, then all the other prohibitions, right? She died. He could marry her sister, because you can marry a sister of a woman after she dies, but he could not marry. Well, that's it. He could marry her sister. Okay. Tom, if yibum is prohibited, they still must perform chalitzah in those cases, right? So I answered that question when I answered your first question, right? Because normally there is no levirate bond, and therefore you don't perform chalitzah if yibum is prohibited. But it's those borderline liminal cases where they can't get married due to mitzvah or sanctity or some other reason that's not a prohibited relation, where they might still require chalitzah. Okay, and so I'll take this last question, which is off topic. When was the Talmud created, and can non-Jews study it in the spirit of interfaith understanding? It's a great question, and one we should address from time to time. It's quite interesting. So, first of all, what is the Talmud? The Talmud is the combination of the Mishna and the Gemara, and all the commentary that's been added since then. But really, the Talmud is the Mishna and the Gemara. So the Mishna was the codification of the oral law that stretches all the way back to Mount Sinai. And then the oral tradition added to that law. So there were certain laws that were given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai orally, rather than included in the written Torah. And the classic example is tefillin, the black box with the straps that a Jewish man is obligated to wrap on his arm every day and over his head, unless it's a holiday or Shabbos. So the Torah says that these words which I teach you on this day, you shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a symbol before your eyes. What does that mean? How do you bind it on your hand or make it a symbol before your eyes? Well, the laws of what tefillin are, the black box, the strap, the parchment inside, etc., was originally given to Moses at Mount Sinai. But then the sages themselves added many rabbinic decrees over the centuries. First it was the men of the Great Assembly, the prophet, the elders, the judges, the elders, the prophets, the men of the Great Assembly, and then the sages. And all through that period, like certain decrees were added as a fence around the Torah, so that we wouldn't come inadvertently to transgress the written laws of the Torah. So that basically explains what the Talmud is, right? It's that codification of the oral tradition. It was never meant to be written down. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, around the year 200 of the Common Era, said we're going to have to write it down, only because the Roman persecution of the Jewish spiritual leadership is so intense that everybody who has the oral tradition mastered, meaning memorized, and they're supple and can issue rulings based on it, might be killed. And then, the Jews who survive won't know how to run their lives, because the way we live as Jews all comes from these discussions in the Talmud. And that's why it was written down, first the Mishnah, but it was very terse, very compact, and needed some expansion in writing. And that's what the Gemara was, which was compiled around the year 500. Then much commentary has been added over the centuries since. May it be taught to non-Jews. We certainly have non-Jews learning in our class. And you are all welcome here. But some of it is problematic, right? Because sometimes we're talking about stuff that pertains to Jews and not to non-Jews. We get into sensitive situations where it can feel, especially to the modern ear, like the Jews only care about the Jews and not about the non-Jews. And that is absolutely not true. In the Talmud itself, it says that everyone has a place in the world to come, meaning Jews and non-Jews. Non-Jews do not need to become Jews to have their place in heaven. Perhaps Judaism is unique in that way. But there are laws that only apply to Jews, and it's sort of in-group discussion. So normally you would not teach the Talmud to non-Jews directly, just me teaching it to a non-Jew. And there are some opinions that say that's prohibited. And so prior to starting to teach this class online, I consulted a dayan, right? So a posek, a poskening rabbi, a rabbi who issues halakhic rulings. Can I teach this class? And what he said was, if you are teaching Jews in your class, that is very important, particularly all the members of our class who wouldn't be learning otherwise. And if non-Jews attend and learn along the way, that's going to be okay. What makes the class, sort of permissible and even desirable is that Jews are learning who would not be learning otherwise. So hopefully that answers your question. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 29 and Mishna number 2 here in chapter 3 of Tractate Yevamos. Have a great night.